Hello everyone and welcome to another part of the SDL 2.0 tutorial series. In this video we're going to be covering advanced input handling, and for that we will be implementing a few functions. For example, when a key is pressed and or when a key is released, as well as the mouse input. So we'll do the same thing for the mouse buttons and the mouse position and so on. So the first thing that we'll need to do is go to our InputManager.h, and in here we will need a few extra includes. For that we will include string.h, and with string.h we will need it for memory copy, and we will also need our mathhelper.h. So include mathhelper.h. Now we can get started on the class itself. In here we will need an enum for the mouse buttons that we're going to be handling. So public enum mouse buttons, and then here we will have left equals 0, and then we'll have right, middle, back, and forward. There we go. And then next up are a few private variables that we're going to need. And one of these will be our previous key state. So we have our current key state here, but we need a previous key state to store our last frame's key state. For that we will make a uint8 pointer, and this will be called previous key state. I think we should call this one key state instead states, and then we'll update that in the CPP later on. And we will also need an int key length, and this will store how many keys we have in our key state array. Next up we will need a uint32, and this will be our previous mouse state, and we will also need a uint32, which will be our current mouse state, so mouse state. And finally, two variables for the mouse positions, x and y. So this will be int mouse x position and int mouse y position. And this will be it for the private variables that we will need. Next up are the public functions, and then here we will need beside the key down we'll also need key pressed and key released. So boolean key pressed, this will take an SDL scan code just like the other one, scan code, and this will be scan code, and a boolean key released, and this will take an SDL scan code, and this will be called scan code as well. Okay, so now moving on to our mouse functions, we will need a boolean mouse button down, and this will take one of our enum values, so mouse button, and we'll call this one button, and then mouse button, and then boolean mouse button pressed, which will take a mouse button as well, and a mouse button released. Button, and there we go. So these are the mouse functions that we'll need. We will also need a mouse position function, and for that, and this is why we included the mathhelper.h, because we're going to be returning a vector2, and this is because it makes it a lot easier to work with it using all our other classes, because everything else uses vector2. So the int x and y will just use to retrieve the mouse position from the SDL library. So vector2 mouse position. We will also need an update for our previous input, so we'll put void update previous input, and we'll go over why we need an extra update function for that later on. Okay, so this should be it for all the changes that we need to do in our .h. So now we can move on to our .cpp and implement some of these functions. So the first thing that we'll need to do is in our constructor, we will set our mKey states. So mKey state is going to be equal to SDL underscore get keyboard state. And we'll pass this a reference to our mKey length so that we know how many keys we have. And since we're updating it in here, we're setting it in here, and this is a constant pointer, it will always keep updating regardless whether or not we keep calling it over and over again in every update. So we'll probably be removing this in a little bit. So moving on, we need to initialize our previous keyboard state. So key state, probably call this previous keyboard state just to stay to keep it the same as this one. So previous keyboard state is going to be equal to a new uint 8 of size key length. Now the last thing we need to do is copy our keyboard state into our previous keyboard state. That way we have it at least updated once on the first frame. So we'll do memcopy of previous keyboard state. Our source will be our keyboard state, and our size will be mKey length. And this will be it for our constructor. Now moving on to our destructor, we need to delete our previous keyboard state because we used new over here. So delete array previous keyboard state and set our previous keyboard state to null. So this should be it for our destructor. Now for our key down. So we changed it to key state, so we just need to remove the S here, and this can stay the same. And next up we need to implement our key pressed. And key pressed is pretty straightforward. If the key was not pressed in our previous state and it's pressed in our current state, that means we can fire it to be true. Otherwise it would be false. So InputManager key pressed SDL underscore scan code. This would be scan code, and then we'll just return not previous keyboard state at the scan code and our keyboard state at the scan code. And this will be it for our key pressed. Now for our key released, so we'll do boolean InputManager key released SDL scan code, and we'll return previous keyboard state at scan code and not keyboard state at scan code. So this will be it for our key functions. Next up will be our mouse button functions. And the mouse button will be a little bit different. For the mouse, we will first do our position. So for the mouse position, we'll do vector2 InputManager mouse position, and we'll return a vector2 of float mouse x position and a float of mouse y position. And this will be it for that. Now to move on to our mouse button down. And for this we will do boolean InputManager mouse button down. This will take the mouse underscore button enum, which will be a button, and we will switch this enum in here. So switch button case left. Oh, first we will need a mask. So the mask will be a uint32. We'll call this one mask, which will start off being 0, and then case left we'll set our mask to equal to SDL underscore button underscore L mask. And then we'll do the same thing for the right. So right break mask is equal to SDL underscore button underscore right mask. Case middle will be mask equals SDL underscore button underscore M mask. Case back is going to be equal to, the mask is going to be equal to SDL underscore button underscore X1 mask. And the last one is our forward, which would be case forward break mask is going to be equal to SDL underscore button underscore X2 mask. And then all the way at the end, after the switch, we will just return mouse state with a bitwise AND with mask. So if the mask is not present in our mouse state, it will return false. Otherwise, it's going to return something, so we can take that as true. Now, the other two functions will be our mouse pressed and mouse released. And for that, we can just copy this whole function and paste it again. And then for mouse, instead of mouse button, it would be mouse pressed. But all the way down here, instead of this, we will put in that it shouldn't be there in the previous mouse state, but it should be there in the current one. So not previous mouse state and mask and mouse state and mask. So this should be it for this function. Next up is our released. So there we go. So for our released, we will do, so it's the same thing, but this one will be released. And in here, we will just remove the not from here and add the not there. So if it's present in our previous state and it's not present in our current state, then it's released. Now moving on to our update function. Now we don't need this anymore, so we can remove it, but we will need to update our mouse state. So our mouse state is going to be equal to SDL underscore get mouse state, and we'll pass it a reference to our mouse X position and a reference to our mouse Y position. There we go. Now to move on to our update previous input, we'll put void InputManager update previous input, and in here we will do the memory copy of the keyboard state. So memcopy previous keyboard state, keyboard state, and finally key length. And for the previous mouse state, we'll just say that the previous mouse state is equal to mouse state. And this will be it for our InputManager. Now we can go ahead and go to the GameManager and test it out. And for that, we will go down here. And let's remove some of these now. So we'll remove this, and let's say this is scan code W. And instead of an audio output, we'll just say something like printf W key. Well, we already know that key down works, so let's try key pressed. Pressed. And then try key released. So there we go. And then let's run it and see how it goes. Oh, there's one thing that we missed. Okay, so memcopy does not take 3. That is odd. Mem copy. There we go. We also need to add all the way at the end, we need to update our previous input. So input manager update previous input. So this needs to go right before the reset of the time, and we'll organize that in a little bit. So there we go. So we are tracking W. So if I press W, it's pressed. If I release it, it's released. So that seems to work. Now let me put some line breaks here so that it's a bit more. It's a bit easier to see. And let's try our mouse input. So if InputManager InputManager mouse button pressed, and we'll give it InputManager left. We'll print F left mouse button pressed, and we'll do the same thing for released, and this will be released. And then let's run it and try it out. There we go. So left mouse button, I'm pressing it and then releasing it, and it's catching these events. So that seems to work out pretty well. And then if we want the middle mouse button, for example, we can just change this to middle. And there we go. So middle mouse button. Oh, there's something wrong here. So InputManager. Yeah. Let's see. There we go. We were just printing left instead of, so middle. There we go. So if I press the middle mouse button, it says middle mouse button pressed. I release it, it's released. If I press the left, nothing happens. If I press the right, nothing happens, and none of the other buttons are firing. So this seems to work out pretty well. Now we just need to organize this run function a little bit, and for that we will create a few private functions in our game manager. So in here we'll create our void early update, void update, void late update, and void render. So now if we go back to our game manager, right above run here we can do void early. So game manager early update, and in our early update all we need to do is to take this one. So take our timer and put it there. So we're updating our timer in our early update before anything else happens. Void game manager. In our normal update we can update we can catch input, so that's fine. So we can do that. Oh, no, maybe not the timer. The timer can stay here. I meant to take the input manager. So our input manager will be on our early update. All our input catching and updating our objects can go into our normal update function. All our rendering can go into our rendering. So into render. Let's create that void game manager render. So that's here. And the last one will be void game manager late update. And in here we just need to reset the timer and update the previous input. So we'll put that here. And this should be it. So in here now all we need to do is call these functions. So we'll do an early update, and then an update, and then a late update, and then finally a render at the end. And late update we can use, for example, for collision detection or for physics, because we know that all our objects are going to be updating in the normal update function. So in late update we can do all these collision checks and moving the objects back to where they belong before we render these objects. So there we have it. if we try to run it now, everything should be running as it was before. So there we go. And that should be it for this video. So now we have our advanced input manager working. We are catching key presses, mouse presses, and releases. And we have our game manager a bit more organized now. So if this video was helpful, please let me know in the comments below. If you have any suggestions or feedback, please let me know as well. But otherwise, thank you very much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.